Hello, welcome to What's the TSSFS. Thanks for joining us. I'll let us introduce ourselves real quick. My name is Carrie. I am the manager of our community education program, and I'm joined by most of my team today to talk about some of the fundamentals of domestic violence to get us started during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Angela, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Angela Davis, and I am a part of the community education program.
And here, my name is Celeste Angula. I'm also a community educator here at South Suburban Family Shelter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lasandra Hutchinson, and I'm the community outreach specialist, and I'm also a part of the community education program.
Thanks for being together with us today. As I said, welcome to What's the Tea. If you're new to our program, we stream live every Tuesday. Today is our first day at 2 p.m. and that's our new time. We've been at 1 p.m. in the past, so keep joining us at 2 p.m. every Tuesday. The program is just a chance for us to give you the inside scoop on things at our agency and topics, issues, and dialogues related to domestic violence. So today we are kicking off Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which happens every October. It's a real special month to those of us that work in this field. And it gives us a chance to really center discussions about domestic violence and how that impacts people in their day-to-day lives, how that impacts our communities, and how that impacts everyone's well-being. So today we are going to have just a discussion about domestic violence, sort of fundamentals as we call it, and give you a sense of what we mean when we refer to domestic violence. What are the interpersonal dynamics that often happen, some of the types of abusive behaviors that are very often seen and experienced by survivors, and just give you a little deeper look that way. So as you listen to us today, we hope you'll put your questions in the comments. We would love to address them, engage with you in that way. And what we're going to do is get the ball rolling to this afternoon. I almost said this morning. We'll get the ball rolling today with some myths and facts about domestic violence. We love to dispel myths that people may have about domestic violence, and so we're going to get started doing that. One of the myths that I hear all the time is that domestic violence is a private matter, that this doesn't concern anyone but the people who are involved. And that's a myth because in fact, domestic violence is a criminal act. And this is something where one person is harming another or others in their family. And as communities, we have an expectation or a duty rather to one another to promote safety for each other. And where somebody is being abused, they often can't advocate for themselves to get the help and support they need to move out of that abusive environment, whether physically, emotionally, however that's looking for them. So that's a very dangerous myth that I often hear and like to address very directly by saying this is everyone's business. Where violence is happening to anyone in our communities, we have a responsibility to those folks to be of support and to validate their experience and do our best to connect them with the support they need to be well. Another one that comes up a lot, and I'm going to ask my peers here to respond to some of these. One of the ones I hear quite a bit is that this doesn't happen in the LGBTQIA plus community, that domestic violence can't happen in relationships other than heterosexual relationships. Celeste, do you have any thoughts about that particular idea you want to share?
Wow, well, that's not a myth that I'm too familiar with, but I definitely have heard people say it before. It doesn't happen in these type of relationships. I think what I'd like to say about that is that you can't say it doesn't happen to anyone. Domestic violence could happen to anyone at all, no matter where you live in, no matter what your gender is, no matter how old you are. There's nothing that can exclude you from domestic violence never happening to you or around you. So that's definitely not true.
Absolutely. Thank you for those insights. It's important to note that of all sexual orientations, bisexual women are the most highly impacted statistically by domestic violence and intimate partner violence. So this is definitely something that happens in all relationships, regardless of sexual orientation, gender identity, any sort of factors like that. Nobody is immune, unfortunately, to this kind of violence happening in their relationships. Another one that I often hear is that substance abuse is the cause of domestic violence. Angela, do you have any thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, so I know that we hear this a lot, especially when consuming alcohol. You know, oh, she probably just did it, or he probably just did it because of the alcohol consumption. And that's definitely a myth, because that person had those violent tendencies in them to begin with. So all that, the liquor or the other substance abuse, whatever they choose to use, is basically just heightening the lethality of the situation. Because if you want to be abusive, then you would, whether you had the alcohol in your system or not. So that's really definitely an excuse, which we don't like to talk about as well, or hold them to that, because it was just the alcohol. It was just, that substance abuse problem. I told you that there was nothing wrong with me, so that could definitely be used as an excuse.
Thank you for your insights. Very important that we understand when somebody is choosing to be abusive with their partner or with their family, they are in fact making that choice. And as Angie said, any substance use, whether it's alcohol or any other substance that impairs your ability to think clearly, to choose nonviolence, is going to heighten the likelihood that you'll use violence if you already are doing so in your relationship. So it is an easy way to scapegoat one's choice to use violence against their partner. So we have to have, again, that responsibility as educators in this field to help people understand that that's not the reason for the violence, but that it does make it more lethal and more likely to happen. Another one I often hear is that if somebody really didn't like being abused, that they would leave or they would ask for help, that they must like it because they're staying. Lysandra, can you shed any light on why that's a falsity?
Yeah, absolutely. I have heard that surprisingly from teenagers in some of the trainings. And it's sad to hear it, honestly, when you hear that, it's sad because people don't understand that TDV, teen dating violence or domestic violence, one of the partners is trying to keep power and control over the other. And so there's so many things that are being used, like threats, fear, shame, gaslighting, all kinds of tactics to be able to keep the victim in the situation and to perpetuate the situation. And I know we're going to get into more talk about the cycle of violence too, and how that confuses things and makes it hard for a person to leave. So
yeah, it's clear. Thank you for your thoughts on that. It's clearly such a complex experience for people that I think you would do well to listen to our tea today for sure, as a way to get yourself basics of understanding these issues. And we encourage you to seek out more education and conversation surrounding these topics. Lysandra, we've been talking a lot about our facts and myths so far as a way to sort of acknowledge that everybody has an idea about what domestic violence is. Would you help us with sort of a definition of what we mean in our agency when we talk about domestic violence? I understand that not everybody will use the same exact definition, dictionary definition of this concept, but I know that our board approved our definition, and it's the way that we have a collective understanding in our agency about the work we do and how we serve our clients.
So I'm going to read our definition of domestic violence, and this is straight from our 40-hour. We provide a training at South Suburban Family Shelter called the 40-hour training. And so if you want to be certified in the state of Illinois, we provide a training. And one of the trainings is called Foundations in Domestic Violence. And so there we break down the definition of domestic violence, which is: domestic violence is the deliberate pattern of abuse behaviors used by one person to maintain power and control over another within the context of a household, intimate partner, or familial relationship. Domestic violence includes physical, psychological, sexual, spiritual, and financial abuse, threats, intimidation, harassment, isolation, manipulation, or coercion. And finally, power and control in an abusive relationship is the intentional and systematic use of threats, intimidation, coercion, or violence to instill fear and dominance over another individual. And so this really is kind of what I just spoke to in the myths and facts section. We talk about the power and control wheel as well. which is something used. If you've been a part of a DV training before, you've probably seen the power control wheel, and it basically breaks down all the different tactics of power and control that is used by the abuser. And so that can be intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using the children as a mode of manipulation or a subject of manipulation, using privilege, using economic abuse, and then using threats and coercion. So that may look like, for example, and you guys can jump in with examples as well, because we talk about this all the time, but that may look like, I want you to, do what I tell you to do. And if you don't, I'm not going to provide for your basic necessities. So like, let's say the abuser is the breadwinner. I'm not going to be buying your soap. I'm not going to be getting your deodorant, all of these. I'm going to have your phone turned off. And so that's one way that the abuser maintains power and control over the victim. You guys want to
Yes.
jump in with other examples?
Well, I just wanted to say this brings me to the different types of abuse, which
Okay.
is basically what you're talking about now. It's that a lot of people do think when they hear the word domestic violence or where they find out somebody was in a domestic violent relationship, they will assume, and here we go with another myth, they will assume that this person was being physically hurt. And so even when we go to present to children, to teenagers, we ask them, what is domestic violence? They usually say, well, when one person is hitting the other person, which is true, but that's not the only type of abuse. And so domestic violence can play out in so many different ways. The four that we usually highlight are physical abuse, which is basically hurting somebody's body, hitting, punching, slapping, whatever it is, hurting somebody's body. But that's not the only one, y'all. There's also verbal and emotional abuse, which is actually the most common type of abuse. It's actually the most common, and it's usually the one that comes first before it escalates to any other type. So verbal emotional abuse can be name calling, putting somebody down, threatening them, basically lowering their self-esteem. And sometimes this can be done without the victim even noticing what's happening, because it usually starts so subtly that before it escalates, now you're in a situation where you think to yourself, how did I get here? We also have sexual abuse, and this one can be pretty tricky when it comes to marriage or an intimate relationship where they've already been intimate in the past. Sometimes victims don't believe that they're being abused because they believe that they accepted to be in this relationship, whether it's dating this person or getting married to this person. And so I would like to note that if there hasn't been consent, no matter if it isn't marriage, consent is still necessary. So sexual abuse is definitely still possible within any type of relationship. And then the last one we usually talk about is property abuse, which this is a very broad topic here. Property abuse can be so many different things. Financial abuse falls into this category, not allowing the victim to have any power over the finances, not allowing them to spend any of the money, sometimes even hiding passports or hiding the car keys so that they can't go anywhere. And so there's so many different types of abuse. And sometimes people think there's not so many or that it isn't so broad, but it's important to be able to recognize them. And so you can also help somebody. Any other comments on that?
I'm so glad you highlighted that sexual abuse can happen regardless of the terms of your relationship, because as you said, it's so easy for a survivor to dismiss something that's abusive because they think they agreed to it when they got married or they agreed to it when they moved in together. And so then now they must have to do whatever sex act or whatever intimacy that their partner wants whenever their partner wants it. And that's just really, it goes again to the idea of myths about domestic violence or healthy relationships. In a healthy relationship, both people are enthusiastic about sexual contact with one another. There's consent, right? It's not, I'm doing this because my partner is forcing the idea or forcing the act. So I'm so glad that you highlighted that. And it's really clear listening to you, Celeste, how subtle that abuse can be, and how easy for people to deny that they are either choosing to abuse their partner or for a survivor to deny that they're being abused, because we normalize these kind of acts as a society, right?
Exactly.
How about you all? Do you have any thoughts about the types of abuse that Celeste talked about?
So one thing I would say, especially with the verbal and emotional abuse, I know Celeste, you spoke about this, and I just really think, I know we talk about this a lot within the high schools too, about individuals not knowing that they're in a domestic violence relationship because it's not physical, you know? So I know that you spoke about this, but that's just really important, because I've noticed that, especially a lot of teenagers we run into, you know, it's so normal, like, oh yeah, she calls me that, or yeah, he calls me that, but he didn't mean it, you know. And instead of you really analyzing that situation, and so that's just something that I wanted to point out, because I know that the main thing I hear is, well, it's not physical. Okay, but let's look at the other dynamics of your relationship. And then when you kind of sit down and really dialogue with them, it's like a light bulb will turn on, like, oh wait, that wasn't right, you know. So that's something I did want to highlight.
It's so important, Angie, and it makes me think of how kids are impacted when there's domestic violence in the home. One of the things you're so clearly talking about, Angela, is that kids learn how to be in relationships from their family of origin and from the relationships they grow up observing. So no matter what your family makeup looks like, if there's abuse as part of that family, as a child, you're taking in those messages and thinking that this is how families function. And so if that family is functioning in a way where there's property abuse and financial abuse, somebody isn't ever allowed to choose how the money gets spent, somebody isn't allowed to hold their own job, they're learning that those kinds of behaviors and those kinds of family dynamics are normal. And so then when they get into their first dating relationships, where you all as educators are working with students in high school and junior high, that's why you're hearing those things. Oh, they didn't mean it, or it's no big deal, because they oftentimes have learned that from their home relationships or their community relationships that they're seeing. So that's just one way that kids can be impacted. But of course, when you think back to how you were as a little child, you can probably remember that you just took everything in. Everything you saw, heard, smelled, tasted was brand new, and you took all of that in. And when you're getting messages that are unhealthy, you're unfortunately taking those in as well. And the other thing that happens to children in homes where there's domestic violence is their health is harmed, even if they are never physically harmed themselves, even if they are observing the violence between two adults, their health will still be impacted. This can cause them all sorts of physical impacts, from sleeplessness and insomnia to a higher incidence of flus and colds, to a higher incidence of bone breaks and sprains. And that's all due to the impact on their immune system, right? It's not necessarily that they're more likely to get their bones broken because of physical violence in their home, but simply because the impact of that violence weakens their body's ability to take care of itself. And those impacts can last a lifetime for those children, impacting their ability to be in good health as they live and grow. So it's something that's very important to us at our agency, is to be able to have these kind of frank discussions and education with young students, as young as pre-K all the way through secondary education, to help them understand what healthy relationships really should look like.
I love how you explained that, Carrie. I couldn't have explained it any better. You can list and list and list all the effects that domestic violence has on children. Oftentimes, parents or guardians believe that the children aren't aware of the situation, but they usually feel it. They usually know what's going on, whether they're in their bedroom with their door closed or not. They know what's going on, and they feel their environment. And so it affects them in so many different ways. And this is one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we teach young children, young teenagers, adolescents, we teach them what a healthy relationship is like. Like Angela said, sometimes they think, oh yeah, he or she calls me that, but they didn't really mean it. But they have to understand that this is not a healthy relationship. This is usually the way it starts. And once an abuser sees they can get away with something, it's only going to escalate and it's only going to get worse. So being a model and showing these young people what a healthy relationship actually looks like and feels like is very important.
Thank you. Angela, would you help us understand a little bit about how this violence looks in people's lives? Is there a pattern that we need to be aware of?
Yes, so typically it's a pattern and we call it the cycle of violence. And before I dive into it, I know when we first hear about the cycle of violence, you're like, what's that? And maybe the term is unfamiliar to you, but once it's described, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I see that in that relationship, or I see that within my relationship. So the cycle of violence do have 3 stages, okay? And the best way to describe the cycle of violence is that it's a repeated and dangerous acts of violence that's in a pattern behavior. Okay. So the first stage we call the tension building stage. And this is typically where tension is being built in the household between the abuser and the victim. And typically the abuser is becoming angry or very annoyed, or that you could see tension is rising, whereas the victim, he or she, may be trying to de-escalate the situation, whether that is being very careful with their choice of words, whether that means for them to talk at all right now, because they're being so careful, or maybe this falls into the line of walking on eggshells, being very careful of what you do today. Okay. So that's our first one. And then our second stage, we call the explosion stage. And this is typically where the abuse actually occurs. Okay. I would say that think of how arguments start, it's the arguing and it's the bickering and the use of verbal and emotional words. That typically happens first. So verbal and emotional abuse typically happens first in the explosion stage, but our relationships are different and there's not exactly a cookie cutter within cycle of violence. So unfortunately, sexual abuse could occur first, or it can go straight into the physical abuse. Okay. And then lastly, think about it. If you're in a relationship, you had a really rough day today, you and your partner get into an argument, what is something that you might say next, right? You would say, I'm sorry, I apologize, right? So we call this the honeymoon stage. And typically the honeymoon stage lasts the longest, okay? And because it's kind of like that saying, when it's good, it's really good, right? And so this tends to happen the longest. So all the apologies, let me buy you things, let me take you out, I promise I won't do it again, right? So 3 stages: the tension building stage, the explosion, and the honeymoon stage. And typically it takes a victim about 7 times to go through this cycle of violence before they really do get the strength to leave. But Lysandra, I know that earlier you talked about within our icebreaker about the myths and facts, that it's a lot of different reasons why a person would stay. So could you tell us a little bit about the obstacles?
Yeah, so I think that what you're talking about, the cycle of violence, is really key in understanding why people stay. And I think the bottom line is just to say, it's not always bad. Even though there's domestic violence, even though there's things that happen, when you're in it from your perspective, it doesn't feel like it's bad 100% of the time. And so people begin to feel as though they have ups and downs, like, oh, we argue just like anyone else, or we fight just like anyone else, or things have gotten out of hand just like anybody else's relationship. And so it feels normal because there are those seasons of a honeymoon where you feel in love and you feel healthy and you feel like things are thriving. And so it's important to recognize that the difference, what makes a relationship different that has domestic violence present from a healthy relationship that has normal ups and downs, again, is that the abuser is there's an abuser that is trying to use the abuse or use the put downs, the sexual violence, the emotional abuse, the physical abuse as a way to maintain control over the other person. And it's in a pattern. It's not just like, okay, we had a bad argument, but there's a pattern of behavior, like you said. And so some of the obstacles to leaving become denial. Am I really going through this? Is anything really happening? Or do we just have a normal situation where, just like anybody else, we have ups and downs? So that makes it difficult. Denial. Also, because the abuser tends to use threats, there's a lot of fear. Sometimes an abuser will say, well, I'm going to hurt your mom if you leave, or I'm going to hurt the kids, or I'm going to hurt a pet, or I'm going to, if someone maybe is an immigrant, they may use their status and hold that over their head and say, okay, I'm going to report you. Sometimes if someone has not come out about their sexual orientation, the abuser will say, well, I'm going to out you to your parents or someone else that you don't want to know if you try to leave me. And so there's all these different obstacles. They may use the children to guilt them. Okay, well, what about your kids? You're not going to be a good mom. You're not going to be a good dad if you leave me. What about our family? So there's that. There's also just the abuser minimizing what's going on, to make it seem as though it's just not a big deal. Like, you're overreacting. What I've said or what I've done is not a big deal. This is you're blowing things out of proportion, or blaming the victim and making them think it's their fault. You've provoked me to hitting you. You've provoked me to cursing you out again. And so then the abuser can become confused. It can be, the victim can become confused and begin to wonder if it may really be their fault. And there's also, we hear this often too, the abuser will tell the victim, nobody's ever going to really love you or want you besides me. And like you said, I think, Celeste, the self-esteem and the ability to really keep that confidence wears down over time. Like, every time you go through this cycle, it's hard for you to really be in touch with what is real, your intuition, your sense of self-esteem, your sense of confidence, every time you go through that cycle of abuse. So it just builds more and more challenges to leaving.
Yeah, very good list, Sandra. I think that this is so important, along with everything else that we're talking about, but it's so important to talk about these obstacles to leaving. Again, with the myths, people say, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just leave? I've heard that from so many people around me, so many presentations that I've taught, even family members have said this to me. And boy, do I lecture them. But there's all these reasons. There's so many reasons. There's more reasons to stay than there are to leave for some people, because it could be harder to leave a situation like this than it is to stay. Sometimes people really do, victims really are in love, because it doesn't happen from the first date. It doesn't happen from day one. They aren't abusive in the beginning. They fell in love with this person who was somebody else. And they might still have hope that they're going to go back to be that person. So somebody's in this cycle that Angie just explained. We've got the tension building stage, the explosion stage, and the honeymoon stage, where they feel like everything's good. And like you said, they're in this cycle about 7 times. Yeah. And so let's say that they do want to do something about it. It's time. They want to get help. They want to do something. Angela, can you talk to us a little bit about what can they do?
Yeah, so I know it's definitely, because I want to cover like what can they do, but I know it's hard for family and friends to know what can I do as well, like what can I do? So I would say that for someone that is trying to leave their situation, first, I just want you to know that you are not alone. And please do not feel bad. It doesn't matter. I don't care if it took you an hour, a year, 4 months to leave your situation. You are still resilient and you are still strong, and you wanted to get help now is a big step. One thing that I do want to say that I know we stated before, please let me know, you all, if I miss out on anything, but please reach out to our agency. That's first and foremost, right? Because we offer not only free counseling, which we do have bilingual advocates, right? But we have that emergency shelter, court advocacy, medical advocacy. Let us help you. Let us help you with getting that order of protection. Let us help you with getting those counseling sessions, right? Let our advocates help you with safety planning, because one thing that is very important to know, safety planning for one person may look different to another person, right? So being able to, coming in to talk to our advocates to get that one-on-one session, right? So based on the lethality of, God forbid, Celeste, your situation is going to look different from my situation, right? So that's first and foremost. And then for those that want to help and you don't know what to do, maybe you don't feel that you are very knowledgeable on domestic violence itself, or maybe you just don't know what to say, right? So the first thing I would say is, for one, don't judge them. Okay, don't judge them, listen to them, and most importantly, believe what they say. Because if you were not the first person that they disclosed to, they probably weren't believed before. So I don't care how crazy a situation may seem or how foreign story may seem to you, always respect them in their decisions and know that they are the expert of their own life, right? Something else is ask them what kind of help they would like you to provide, right? Maybe you are busy just trying to get them core advocacy counseling and they didn't need that from you. They just needed someone to vent to. They just needed a hug, right? So I know that sounds very cliche, but no, seriously, ask them what would they like you to do for them. Another one is offer to provide practical support that will promote their safety. So for instance, what that means is maybe you talk with that person and you say, hey, let us create a code word. And when you are in danger, you call and you let me know so that I know that code word. Or, hey, I have an emergency kit at my house. Whenever you need me, I'm here. Or if you need emergency transportation, always feel free to call me, right? So give them that ability to let them know that you're in their corner, whether they need you right now or a week from now. And then two more, don't feel the need to be an expert. I think that might be the biggest issue with the friends and family when it comes to their loved ones in domestic violence situations, that we want to take on being a counselor. Well, we don't need to take on being an expert or a counselor. What you have to do is connect them to those resources and then let that expert take over, right? Because also too, you trying to be a counselor, that's coming into terms with your self-care, the right messages, the right resources, the right information to tell them. So try not to be an expert and just be their family or their friend, right? And then lastly, be patient, because self-empowerment might take a long time. And I think a lot of times because we love that person, it's like, okay, I got all the things for you. Okay, bye, leave the situation. And they may not be ready, right? So you have to be patient. Because it's not your situation. And at the end of the day, we can say what we would do if that was us, but we don't know until we're in that situation. So those are just some of the few things that we would like to share with you for those that are having a hard time of knowing how to form that support or love to that victim or survivor.
I have a comment. I love the list. Definitely, if somebody's sitting around not sure what to do, there's so much you can do. But something I think I want to add, just something as simple as talking about it, because domestic violence is really a taboo for people. Some people don't like to touch the subject. I know even when we go to resource fairs and we're sitting there waiting for people to walk up to our table, a lot of people just pass right by us because for whatever reason, they don't want to talk about it. So basically something as simple as talking about domestic violence, making it something that people talk about and everybody wants to help out, that could make a difference.
And that definitely goes into what happens in the household stays in the household, or that's their problem, not mine, right? So that about that myth and fact that we covered earlier. So absolutely being able to talk about it. One thing I could say is that our agency has really been out there as putting domestic violence resources in your face. Like, we're here, we're not going nowhere. You can't run from us. Yes, but that's good. Yeah, thank you for that too, Celeste. That was a good idea.
I was going to say too, I think that point is a great point, and it goes into just remembering if it takes someone up to 7 times to leave, it takes a lot of patience to be the support network of a person that's going back and forth. And so I've heard some people become frustrated with a person that they know is in an abusive situation or abusive relationship because they're like, well, they may seem like they're going to leave. I'm going to go through all of this work to try to help them leave, but then they're only going to just go back. But really, people need you to stay invested, even if it's not calling every day or checking on them, but people need you to stay invested in what is happening with them, their health, to be aware of what's going on with them. Because again, it's not that easy to leave. It takes a lot. Sometimes it takes a long time. Sometimes it takes years. And so for a person that's in it to know I can still call X, Y, and Z, they're still going to believe me, or they're still going to show up for me, or they're still going to help me. That's really important. I think also for those that want to support others, just when we each become aware of like the dynamics of domestic violence, what we're talking about today, we're helpful to the people around us because we're aware of those signs and those red flags. And I know we joke about this, but I think that like I can't see any relationship without looking through my DV lens. So anytime anybody meets anyone new, I'm like, oh,
It's so funny
I
because my
assess them.
partner and I was just talking about that today, and I was like, I can't stop applying my knowledge.
And he's like, you can't turn it off. Everything is like have DV sunglasses on. But and I don't think we went into this a lot, but just we talked about this in preparation, the characteristics of an abuser. I'll just talk about that a little bit. One of them is that there's usually a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde personality type. And so oftentimes an abusive person knows how to present well. They're going to come off charming. They're going to come off friendly. They're going to come off smart. They're going to come off as a person that is very caring and romantic. And so if you're on the outside of their relationship, it may not be easy for you to even believe that this person is perhaps abusive behind closed doors. So I think just even making sure that you understand that and that you believe the person or the victim when they come to you and disclose.
So is there anything else that's on our minds, on our hearts today that we would like to share about the foundations of domestic violence?
Group, have I successfully rejoined you all?
Yes.
Yes, you are here.
We had a brownout. I'm sorry for the interruption. I just think that what Lysandra was just sharing really beautifully explains why this is not a private matter, because as you described it, I'm thinking, look at how many people are impacted by somebody's issues and experiences related to domestic violence. You know, as listening to you say, you know, people need you to stay engaged with them and to be able to trust that when they're ready or they need support that you won't have disappeared. That means that the domestic violence that survivor is experiencing is touching the people that care about that survivor as well. And that just demonstrates so clearly to my way of thinking that how this is not private. It reaches out from the home and out from the relationship in all ways. And so I think I really appreciated your insights there. And I'm hopeful that we have some really great questions in our comments.
Rachel, do we have any questions?
That's my cue, huh?
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. We have two questions, but I think you guys did an amazing job covering these questions already, but I will be happy to re-ask them. Maybe we can give them a little more insight on it. But for the first question, it's how can family or friends be supportive if they suspect domestic violence is happening to their loved ones?
Angela looks like she's got some good thoughts.
Look, because you know I'm on that. How can I help? No,
Yeah.
But no. One of the things that stick out with me, I think it's really important for friends and family to understand that even if you suspect that a loved one is going through this situation, be very careful of when you approach the situation. Make sure it's a confidential time. It's a trusted time to be able to do so. And when you do bring it to them, I would say be careful with your choice of words. You know, just let them know, hey, you know, I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I haven't been seeing you around a lot. You're not posting on Facebook as much anymore. What's going on? Instead of coming to them like, hey, you know, what's going on? Are you in an abusive relationship? That's probably going to just, what are you talking about? What? No. And they're going to shut down. So just be very careful. You don't want to be at a family reunion and all the cousins are sitting around and you're asking if they're in an abusive relationship, right? That's not really confidential. That's not safe. So just make sure that when you do approach that you take that into consideration.
Really good response, Angela. Safety is the key factor in responding and supporting to folks that are being impacted by domestic violence. Everyone in today's tea has talked so much about power and control, and any time that a person, an abusive partner, a person who chooses to abuse their partner, feels or perceives that their power is being attacked or at risk or challenged, they'll escalate their use of violence. And so it's so important to have conversations that are safe to be had. And, you know, as Celeste was saying, ask them how they want you to support them. And one of the ways to support them is exactly what Angela just described, is finding private, confidential space to talk and taking their lead. Something that has always helped me in having these kind of conversations, whether in my professional role or personal, because this happens, of course, outside your job when you work in the domestic violence field. Something that always helps me is to be able to sincerely tell the person I care for that no one has a right to harm them, and that their safety is important to me. In no way in those words am I attacking anybody or judging anybody. I'm just letting them know they have a right to their safety and their agency, and that they matter to me. And wherever the conversation goes from there is on their terms. It's a way that they can claim their own power.
That was a good answer.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add to that. I think just not being, not judging, being non-judgmental, and letting them make their own choice. Rachel, do we have any more questions in the comments?
Yes, we have a couple more. We do have a question that asks, can you talk about what it takes to end an abusive relationship?
Well, you know, immediately what I thought of is Angela talking about safety planning and how this looks different for every person. Ending a domestic violence relationship is defined by the person in that domestic violence relationship. And so from our point of view at the agency, we focus on education and empowerment in many ways. And so when a survivor is choosing whether it's safe or the right choice or the right time to leave someone who's being abusive to them, our role is really to help them make those decisions in as informed and empowered a way as possible, and with always promoting the safest way to do that. So, you know, I think in several of our episodes of Tea, we've heard folks from our different programs reference, I know our intern Kayla said this, and our associate director Carol said this, that our role is to be in the passenger seat with the map while they drive the car and make the decision on the route. And so leaving means whatever it means to the driver of that car. And if that means taking back financial independence, if that means divorcing someone, if that means staying with an abusive partner while they commit to working on accountability for their actions, then those are the decisions that we support and promote safety in whatever capacity we can. And it's just going to look very different for each person. I think true surviving from abusive relationships looks like empowerment and agency, that this person is in charge of the choices they make in their life, ultimately. What would you guys add to that?
Yeah, I would add just the point about lethality, and that
Thank you. Yeah.
just that a person is in the most imminent danger when they're trying to leave the abuser, especially if the abuser has realized that, and when they're pregnant. So we talk about that when we're training, and it's important to understand that, because it's like Carrie's saying, it's not easy to just up and go, and you have to consider, especially if the abuser has weapons, access to weapons, has threatened to, end the life of the person that they've been abusing. There's usually a lethality checklist that an advocate will go through with the person that's in the situation to try to assess how much danger they're in, or what they should do with their safety plan, and helps them to safety plan. So there's so many questions and so many factors. Again, we usually would have someone connect with an advocate, connect with the counselor, someone else from South Suburban Family Shelter, to really walk through the details of what it means to either leave or to be safe in the relationship.
Thank you, Lysandra. Such an important part of the process.
Any more? We can go to the next question, Rachel.
All right, it's the last question that I'm seeing right now, but it's a great question to end with, and that is, can you provide any resources for healing from trauma?
South Suburban Family Shelter. We have a terrific counseling program. You've heard from a few representatives, and that, I think, is one of the the foundations of healing from trauma is engaging with what have your experiences been. And our counselors are so well educated and so experienced in working with people who have this particular kind of trauma, that I can't recommend our program highly enough. Obviously, I'm biased, but counseling in any capacity is a key aspect of healing from trauma. There's lots of things I'm sure everyone else on the call will add, but from just a personal point of view, I would say to give yourself grace and kindness that you would show somebody you love. Give that to yourself.
Yeah, oftentimes it's difficult to give that to yourself. We find ourselves thinking about everyone else before we think of ourselves, but definitely call us. We're here to be able to help you. A lot of people do think that, if you're in a situation like this and calling to get help means you have to make a decision right then and there, and they aren't ready for it. That's not what it means. You can just call, you can talk about your experiences, and just simply talking about what's going on with you is really helpful. To have somebody there on the other side who's not there to judge you, is there to listen and give you recommendations, give you your options, but the choice is yours. Whatever it is that the victim or the survivor wants to do, that's really up to them. We're not here to tell them what it is that they need to do. We're here to listen. So it can be as simple as that. Call and talk to us.
Lysandra or Angela, do you have anything?
Yeah, I was going to say too, what I love about our counseling is that you can come even if it's 20 years later. Like if you experienced DV 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, what have you, you can still come and speak to a counselor that is trauma informed in their practice and knowledgeable about domestic violence, because the effects of abuse of this kind is long lasting and just multifaceted. So it's never too late to address the impact of domestic violence on your life or to heal. It's never too late to heal.
I was gonna kind of say as the closing, because you all gave a lot of great advice. I don't even think that I could say or top that. But one thing just to kind of end with is that the journey to healing is doing what you would do now, is even considering to get help. That's really the first step to healing, is realizing the situation that you're in and wanting that help. So that is the first step. So I know a lot of times, other people may feel that you didn't do much to help your situation, but you have to take things one step at a time, because you have us already in your back, your back pocket. So just take things one step at a time, and you picking up the phone to even call us is the first step.
Absolutely. Rachel, did any other questions come in?
No questions, but a lot of great comments today for just when there's someone who said that Miss Letitia is amazing. So that's one of our counselors. We have had a What's the Tea with her before.
Yes,
so you can always go back and see that. And another comment is just to say, just to stay invested with the victim if you want to be there to help a friend or family member experiencing that. And that is all. So I'll go ahead and give it back to you guys to end the tea today.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you so much to our commenters for sharing your praise for Miss Letitia in particular, and just your recommendation again to stay engaged with survivors and victims of domestic violence is so well put. You are part of our community, you're a part of their community, and you're as important in these conversations and spaces as the professionals are. So we would encourage you, not just during October, during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but in all your relationships to, be engaged with one another. And when something seems off, find a safe way to ask somebody if they want to talk about anything and to let them know you value them. I'll just make a few parting remarks. Again, you can see that I've got my candle here all episode during tea, and that's just an acknowledgement of the many people who have lost their lives due to domestic violence. It's a deadly situation oftentimes. And as highlighted by Lysandra, it gets increasingly violent, increasingly lethal when people choose to leave an abusive partner or when they're pregnant. So those are very high risk times for survivors, and that's something we really want to encourage you to think about. If you know someone or are someone who's struggling with abuse in their life, to call our hotline at 708-335-3028. We have advocates who speak both English and Spanish and will work with you to help you be safe. Otherwise, during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, our agency is posting a daily way to change. Because at our agency, we believe change is possible for everyone, whether that means you are a survivor of domestic violence and you want to make changes in your life to get more safe and more empowered, whether you're someone who uses abuse in the relationships and you want to hold yourself accountable and choose nonviolence. Our agency has programs that can help you do that and make those changes. So we encourage you to follow us on social, just to always keep up on the T for sure. And to follow along with our Ways to Change calendar that we're posting every day, just a small, simple way that you can engage with positive and healthy change in your life and in your relationships and communities. And just imparting, thank you to everyone who participated in, engaged with, watched, or donated to our gala. Our first virtual gala was held last Friday night. It was a fantastic program. We encourage you to look up the video if you had to miss it last Friday. A really terrific program highlighting the work our agency does and our engaged community, many people like you that are watching Tea with us today, and words from many of the folks who've engaged with our services and have experienced that process of change for positive, healthy lives. So anything from the rest of my team on Tea today before I sign us off? Okay, thank you for all your, yes, stay tuned. Thanks for all of your insights today, my friends. Thank you for everybody who watched, and tune in every Tuesday. It's the same day, Tuesday, same time, 2 p.m. and different tea every week. So we hope to see you next Tuesday, and have a great week and a terrific October. Thank you.
Bye.